Am I the a-hole for exposing my parents after they forgot me at their wedding? I know this seems like a weird situation, but I just feel so angry and depressed that I feel the need to vent even if no one is listening. So I, 17F, was recently forgotten about on the day of my parents' wedding. My parents have been together for about 25 years, but they never actually got married. That's why when my dad, 50M, proposed to my mother, 49F, on their anniversary, which they have always celebrated on the date my mother found out she was pregnant with my eldest sister, even though they were already together before, everyone, including me, was elated and celebrated the occasion with great joy. This happened all the way back in February. They immediately jumped into wedding planning, deciding very early on a small event in Hawaii with just the closest family and friends for an intimate ceremony. Almost immediately, my mother asked my sister, 25F, to be her maid of honor, and my dad asked my brother, 22M, to be his groomsman. I wasn't surprised or offended by this. My sister had always been a mommy's girl, and they both enjoyed spending time with each other shopping and socializing, so they had a very close bond. And the same goes for my father and brother. They always played football together and messed around with cars. My father even trained my brother's team for a while in middle school. That had always left me as the odd one out. I tried to insert myself on my family's hobbies and groups that they had within our home, but was always rebuffed. Maybe they could sense that my interest on their activities wasn't all that genuine, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I was used to being the last and least important member of my family. Mom had sis and dad had bro, my parents had each other, and my two siblings were closer to each other than they ever were to me, leaving me very lonely and isolated in my own home. During the preparation for the wedding, initially it was suggested that I be the flower girl, but my sister thought that role would be more appropriate for her daughter, 3F, so that idea was quickly tossed away. Later on, my maternal grandmother suggested that I might read a poem or do a little bit of a speech during the ceremony, but both my parents refused because they wanted the wedding to be low-key, and they didn't think a cheesy and sappy speech would fit their vision, their literal words. I was still okay with all of this, even though it hurt to know I would be the only member of the family to not actually be part of the wedding party or have any role at all on the day. As the day approached, my parents and siblings got more and more caught up on all the wedding planning. I noticed my mom didn't invite me dress shopping, and that whenever they would have discussions about the venue or the event, I was left out. So I decided to see if they would realize that I wasn't being involved at all, and kept quiet, waiting for them to ask me anything about the wedding, but that never happened. They sat around the kitchen table late at night comparing color swatches, talking about flight schedules, and debating floral arrangements while I sat on the living room couch right next to them, completely invisible. I watched my sister try on maid of honor samples while my mother gushed over how stunning she looked, never once asking me what I planned to wear or if I needed help finding something nice for the beach setting. The wedding was set for 3 weeks ago, the end of August. The day before the departure, my mother casually asked if I had my luggage ready because we couldn't be late to the airport. I bluntly told her that I hadn't prepared anything. She got confused for a second and then snapped at me for not being prepared. I then asked her if I even had a ticket, and her face went pale. Yep, they hadn't even bought me a ticket, and I'm not even sure if I had a room or any accommodations once there. Even though I was the only person in my family without unstable income, I work as a part-time babysitter. My parents had bought first-class tickets for my siblings and a couple other friends that were attending the wedding, but had forgotten me. My mom told me not to make a big deal out of it and that they can just find me a low-cost ticket last minute from a cheap airline, but I just replied by asking her, then what? Do I even have a dress for the ceremony? She went with sis to buy hers and all the other female guests months ago, but I wasn't included. That's when my father came in and just told me to suck it up and that I've never been a girly girl, so I could just wear whatever. I got mad at this because, even though I'm not the most feminine girl on the planet, I would have loved to be included in such an important part of my parents' wedding, and it was about the fact that I was excluded for literally everything that had been going on for months. We all got into a fight, with them calling me entitled and accusing me of making myself small intentionally so they would forget me, like that is a valid excuse for ignoring a child. They ended up telling me that if I was going to keep this attitude, I might as well skip the whole thing altogether, to which I responded with a defiant fine and went to my room. Next morning, they all left for Hawaii without me. Sitting in the empty house while my entire family was flying over the Pacific Ocean was a surreal kind of painful. I spent those days wandering through silent rooms, reheating frozen meals, and listening to the echoes of a house that felt bigger and colder than ever. The ceremony was really small, but they all posted loads of pictures on Insta and Facebook about how perfect and magical that whole week was being. There were group photos on the beach with sunset backdrops, bright tropical drinks, and laughing captions about lifetime memories. People realized quickly that I wasn't in any of the photos and asked my parents why, to which they replied that unfortunately I had caught COVID before the trip and had to stay behind. My blood boiled at this. I don't know why this was the straw that broke the camel back for me, but it was. I decided to take a COVID test and published a picture of myself holding the negative test and captioned it, "Not sick at all, just forgotten." I tagged everyone that had questioned my absence from the trip and the wedding in the picture, and, for good measure, also every person invited to it. I also wrote in the comments about how my parents had literally forgotten about anything to do with me until the day before parting, and how they actually uninvited me. Most people were on my side and others couldn't believe it and thought there must be something more to the story than what I was saying, but one thing is for certain. I completely ruined my parents' wedding, and their day was overshadowed by my confession. At first, I felt quite satisfied with myself for standing up on my own, but after a barrage of messages from my family calling me every name in the book and later, when they came back, them furiously attacking me for my immature actions and my spoiled behavior, my pride deflated quickly, and I began to feel awful. My brother sent me texts saying I was a selfish brat who ruined the best day of our parents' lives, and my sister told me I always had to make everything about myself. When they walked back through the front door from their trip, the air was toxic. My parents cornered me in the hallway, yelling about how embarrassed they were in front of all their friends and extended family, accusing me of maliciously waiting to blow up their happy moment. I hate my family, and I hate being in this house, but I'm a minor and can't leave just yet. I do feel like I could have handled the situation better though, and now I feel so depressed that I'm second-guessing everything I did, from not speaking up before to the way I exposed them. I also feel guilty for the lack of connection between all of my family and me, and maybe I could have done more? So, am I the a-hole for ruining my parents' wedding when they forgot about me? Update. Hi, everyone. I wanted to write an update earlier, but I've honestly been struggling to process everything that has happened. My original post received far more attention than I ever expected, and after reading through so many comments and messages, I felt like I owed everyone an update on what's happened since. First, I want to thank everyone who took the time to reply. Whether you shared your own experiences or simply reassured me that my feelings were valid, it meant more than you know. Right after everything happened, I was in a really bad place. I could barely get out of bed, and after hearing my family insist that I had ruined everything, I genuinely started believing I was the problem. Reading the responses from strangers who saw the situation so differently helped me realize I wasn't imagining years of being overlooked. I'm still dealing with guilt and depression, but whenever I start questioning myself, I remember that so many people recognized how wrong this situation was. A lot of people encouraged me to talk to my grandma, so I finally did. Before I get into that, I want to clear something up because it caused some confusion in the comments. My grandma, 77F, wasn't at the wedding. She lives several states away, has mobility issues, and doesn't travel anymore. We visited her around Easter, and that's when she suggested I could read a poem during the ceremony. That was the last time I saw her in person before all of this happened. She's always loved me dearly and has called out my parents for their favoritism before, but because of her health and the distance, there was only so much she could do. She had a minor stroke a few years ago and recovered well, but I still worry about asking too much of her. When I finally called, I told her everything from start to finish. I explained how I hadn't been included in any of the planning, how they never bought me a plane ticket, and how they left without me. She came to the same conclusion that many of you did. She doesn't believe they simply forgot. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours, and for the first time since all this started, I felt like someone in my family was actually listening. I cried more than I expected to, telling her how isolated I'd felt for years and how badly I wanted to leave once I graduated. She promised that I wasn't alone and told me she'd help however she could. That conversation finally gave me enough motivation to start making plans instead of sitting in my room feeling miserable. One of my friends is renting a small studio near the college we'll both be attending next year. She actually has a great relationship with her family, but wants a little independence because she has 5 younger siblings at home. I asked if she'd consider letting me move in temporarily until I could get a job and contribute properly. She immediately agreed and even refused to let me worry about rent until I got back on my feet. After I explained everything that had happened with my parents, we both ended up crying together. Things became more complicated a couple of days later. My grandma decided to call my parents and both of my siblings herself. My brother texted me afterward with what felt like a very half-hearted apology. He claimed he didn't realize I wasn't included and assumed I simply didn't want to go because I wouldn't enjoy the trip. He also insisted my social media post only made the situation worse. My sister was much harsher. According to her, I embarrassed the family publicly over something that should have stayed private, and she insisted everyone else was innocent. My parents' attitude hasn't improved either. At first they were furious, then they switched to pretending none of this had happened. After my grandma spoke to them, they came into my room and said that if I wanted this issue to disappear, I needed to stop talking about it. According to them, Everything would have blown over if I'd just stayed quiet. I asked them to leave, waited until they were gone, and called my grandma again. That's when she told me something I wasn't expecting. She and my uncle, who's my mom's older brother, had already bought plane tickets and were coming to see me. I immediately tried to convince her not to make the trip. Flying is difficult for her because of her health, and I hated the thought of her exhausting herself because of me. She wouldn't hear it. She said she'd put this conversation off for long enough and wanted to speak to my parents face to face. More importantly, she wanted to see me. They arrive tomorrow, and my parents have no idea they're coming because my grandma asked me not to tell them. I'm nervous about how everything will go once they're here. More than anything, I just hope the trip doesn't take too much out of her. I would never forgive myself if something happened because she pushed herself too hard. At the same time, I'm incredibly grateful. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel completely alone. Whether my parents finally acknowledge what they did or not, at least I'll have someone beside me when I tell them that I'm moving out as soon as I can and that I plan to go no contact. I still feel guilty that my grandma has gone to so much trouble because of me, but I'm also thankful beyond words. Right now, all I want is to hug her when she gets here. Update 2. Hello. Sorry for not updating sooner or replying to comments. If you've read my last update, you'll probably understand why this past week has been incredibly hectic. I've received so many kind messages, and while I haven't been able to answer everyone, I've read far more than I expected. It has been comforting but also heartbreaking to realize how many people have experienced neglect or emotional abuse from their own families. Thank you to everyone who took the time to reach out. Your support genuinely helped me get through one of the hardest weeks of my life. I'll just pick up where I left off. After my grandma told me she was coming, I spent the next couple of days worrying about her more than anything else. Traveling is difficult for her because of her health, so knowing she was getting on a plane for me filled me with guilt. I met her and my uncle at the airport early Monday morning, and the moment I saw her, I completely fell apart. I ran straight into her arms and cried harder than I have in years. Everything I'd been holding in came out at once. She just hugged me and kept telling me that I wasn't alone anymore. My uncle wrapped both of us in a hug, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt genuinely safe. We went to their hotel afterward, where my grandma had booked a room big enough for me to stay with her. Once everyone had settled down, I told them everything. Not just what happened with the wedding, but years of feeling left out, constantly being treated as an afterthought, and how hopeless I'd been feeling since everything exploded. I also admitted that reading comments online had made me wonder if I was somehow not my father's biological child because I couldn't understand why I'd always been treated so differently. Both of them listened without interrupting. My grandma immediately shut that idea down. She told me she clearly remembered how excited both of my parents were when my mom became pregnant with me and said she had never had any reason to believe there had been an affair. According to her, the favoritism didn't begin until I was around 3 or 4 years old. My older siblings were already independent enough to join my parents' hobbies and outings, while I was younger, quieter, and needed more attention. Instead of adapting, my parents apparently grew impatient, and over the years that slowly turned into the family dynamic I'd grown up with. She also reassured me that my college fund had already been set aside years ago and that if my parents ever tried to use it against me, she would personally make sure I finished school. On top of that, she offered to help with rent while I got established. I thanked her, but I also explained that this entire situation had opened my eyes. My parents had always provided for me financially. I never had to worry about tuition, food, or basic necessities, and I realized how dependent I'd become because of that. I still accepted her help because I truly needed it, but I also told her I wanted to get a job as soon as possible and become financially independent. That afternoon, we went back to my parents' house. The second we walked through the door, everyone froze. Before anyone could start arguing, my grandma calmly told me to go upstairs and pack everything important while she and my uncle handled the conversation. I could hear raised voices downstairs while I filled 2 suitcases and my backpack with the things that mattered most. When I came back down, the atmosphere had completely changed. My dad looked furious, my mom was crying, and my uncle wasn't letting either of them interrupt. My mom reached toward me and apologized, but after everything that had happened, I simply told her to save it. My father immediately got angry about my response, and my grandma and uncle shut him down before the conversation could escalate again. I walked outside with my bags and waited for the taxi. Back at the hotel, my grandma filled me in on what had been said. My parents insisted they had never planned to stop paying for my education and claimed they were already organizing an extravagant birthday party and buying me a car to make up for everything. My grandma told them those gifts wouldn't erase years of exclusion. What finally seemed to break my mom emotionally was learning that I'd questioned my own paternity because of how unwanted I'd felt. My grandma told her that children don't reach conclusions like that without years of feeling pushed aside. The following day, we visited the studio apartment where my friend and I had planned to live. I'd already seen photos and knew it wasn't great, but seeing it in person was something else. There was mold, water damage, rusted appliances, and obvious signs that the building wasn't well maintained. The neighborhood itself made everyone uncomfortable, and after walking around for a few minutes, even my friend admitted it wasn't somewhere we'd feel safe living. Instead of letting us settle for it, my grandma and my friend's parents offered another solution. They suggested we find a modest two-bedroom apartment in a safer area. My friend and I would still pay the amount we'd originally budgeted each month, and they would cover the difference until we were able to support ourselves. It wasn't what either of us had planned, but it was a far safer option. Until we find that apartment, my friend's family has opened their home to me. They'd already discussed it with my grandma before telling me because they wanted to make sure I had somewhere stable to stay after leaving my parents' house. I honestly didn't know how to thank them. Over the past few days, I've gone back a couple of times to collect the rest of my belongings. My mom cries and apologizes every time she sees me. My dad has apologized too, although our conversations remain brief. My sister called only to tell me that I was destroying the family, so I ended the call and blocked her. My brother sent a long message admitting he'd ignored years of favoritism because it was easier not to notice. I thanked him for apologizing, but also told him I needed space before deciding what our relationship would look like going forward. I've also scheduled my first appointment with a therapist who specializes in teenagers who experience neglect. My grandma is covering the cost for now, which makes me even more determined to become financially independent as soon as I can. That's where things stand right now. I don't know if I'll update again. Maybe after I move into the new apartment or once college starts. For now, I'm focusing on spending time with my grandma and uncle while they're still here and getting settled somewhere that finally feels safe. I also want to thank this community one last time. Reading your stories, advice, and encouragement reminded me that asking for help wasn't a weakness. If I hadn't reached out, I probably would have stayed convinced that everything was my fault. Instead, I found people who helped me see that my feelings were valid, and for that I'll always be grateful. Update 3. Hello everybody. It's been a while, and I'm sorry I haven't responded to messages or updated sooner. Life has been incredibly busy, and I've also been making a conscious effort to move forward instead of constantly reliving everything that happened. A lot has changed since my last post, so I figured I'd come back one more time and let everyone know how things are going. Once they returned home, I settled into my friend's house and started focusing on building some stability. My friend had been working as a private tutor for younger students and introduced me to the same company. I ended up getting hired too, and we've become co-workers as well as roommates. It's my first real job, and while it isn't glamorous, it pays well enough for someone just starting out. Earning my own money has been incredibly satisfying because, for the first time, I'm contributing to my own future instead of depending entirely on someone else. The biggest update is that we finally found an apartment. It's close to campus with 2 bedrooms, a comfortable living room, and a small but functional kitchen. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe, and surrounded by other college students. The neighborhood feels welcoming, and there are plenty of cafes and study spots nearby. We're still unpacking boxes, and I'm actually writing this update while sitting on the floor of my new bedroom surrounded by half-built furniture. I also turned 18 a couple of weeks ago. My birthday ended up being much happier than I'd expected. I went out to dinner with a few close friends, and for once the day wasn't overshadowed by family drama. Well, almost. While I was out celebrating, my parents showed up at my friend's house hoping to see me. I wasn't there, but my friend's dad answered the door. According to him, they were both emotional and apologized repeatedly, asking if he'd convince me to contact them. They left behind a handwritten letter admitting they'd failed me as parents and saying they wanted the chance to make things right. I read the letter. Then I chose not to respond. That wasn't an easy decision, but I felt like reopening contact so soon would undo the progress I'd made. It had taken years of feeling invisible, one disastrous wedding, and my entire extended family stepping in before they acknowledged how deeply they'd hurt me. Right now, I need distance more than apologies. I asked my friend's dad to politely turn them away if they came back again, and he completely respected that. Before classes started, I spent a week visiting my grandma. I showed her photos of the apartment, told her about my new job, and walked her through my plans for college. She was so excited that you'd think she'd been the one moving into her first apartment. My family on her side also organized a small birthday celebration while I was there. My uncles, cousins, and grandma all came together, and for the first time in a long while, being around family didn't make me anxious. My brother was there too. We've slowly started talking again. Looking back, I don't think he actively tried to hurt me the way my sister often did. He benefited from our parents' favoritism and never questioned it, but he wasn't cruel to me. He's apologized more than once, and his actions have matched his words. Since he lives in the same city as me, he's told me that if I ever need help, I can call him. I'm still cautious, and rebuilding trust will take time, but knowing there's at least one member of my immediate family nearby who genuinely cares has brought me some peace. At one point, I asked him how our parents were doing. He told me he'd pulled away from them because he blames them for everything that's happened. My sister apparently feels the opposite and still insists I'm the one causing problems by refusing to forgive them. From what he's heard, many of my parents' friends found out what happened and haven't reacted well. Apparently, my parents openly admit they handled everything terribly and keep saying they want the chance to repair the relationship. Whether that's genuine remorse or an attempt to repair their reputation, I honestly don't know, and I'm not interested in finding out right now. These days, my focus is somewhere else entirely. I'm settling into college, working, going to therapy, and learning what healthy relationships actually feel like. Between my friend, her parents, my grandma, my uncles, cousins, and maybe even my brother, I've realized family isn't just the people you happen to live with. I hope this will be my last update because I'd really like to close this chapter of my life. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.